Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation, we're talking with WRAL's hidden history reporter, Heather Leah, about some of the fascinating reminders of history you can discover while hiking in and around the Triangle. Heather, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So there's so many great hiking trails in our area, but what a lot of people don't know is there are pieces of history kind of all along the trails, history that a lot of us, I'm sure including me, have just walked by without noticing, correct?
Oh gosh, yes, definitely. There's a lot to see out there. My friend and I just walked right into a cemetery one time at Umstead Park and did not know what we were finding.
Did not know it was even there. So I know beneath Falls Lake, for example, in Raleigh, there's a portion of Highway 98. You talked about it as the old ghost road in your story. Tell me about that.
Oh, that's a really cool place to visit. So Falls Lake is one of those lakes that has a lot of history underneath it. It's man-made. And of course, because of that, in the woods around Falls Lake, where a lot of people go hiking, there are remnants of the community that used to live out there. Now, the Falls Lake area was known as the Hurricane or the Hurricane. It was an area that was just outside of Raleigh and very well known, however, back in that time period, even back in I believe the 50s, 60s, 70s. Even my parents remember when the Hurricane was out there. It was a place that was very rural, and there was a lot of moonshining going on out there in those woods. So if you walk out hiking around Falls Lake, first of all, there's an area with old Highway 98 that used to go through that area until they flooded it. And there's a huge stretch of this highway just out in the woods. You're walking in the woods, there's trees everywhere, pine straw everywhere, and then all of a sudden you're walking on asphalt and there's the yellow line going down the middle.
Wow.
It is
a highway
wild.
In the middle of nowhere.
It is wild. You're in the woods and there's a highway just going past you.
Wow.
And the highway leads right into the lake. So if you follow it, it'll just go right into the lake. And along the woods near that highway, there's what I've been told. There are still moonshine stills.
I was going to say, stills would be what I would expect in moonshine country.
Yeah. So there's a lot of history out there in those woods when you're hiking. You just don't know it.
That's fascinating. Well, you mentioned Umstead Park. That is one of my personal favorites. I have spent a lot of time there. And, you know, I have always wondered. I mean, I see old crumbling chimneys, for example. What's out there?
So I'll start with, that was one that surprised me too. You know, I'm from Raleigh. I grew up here. I've been hiking out there all my life. So back when I was a teenager, my friend Amber and I were hiking out there. We decided to go off trail a little bit just for fun. And we got a little bit lost, a little bit turned around, and then we walked right into a cemetery. There were headstones, there were graves. The graves were kind of sunken a little bit. They were older, and then they were surrounded with stones, which was more common in older, like the 1800s or early 1900s, to surround where the body would actually lay with stones, and it's marked like that. And we were freaked out because we had no idea at the time that there were graveyards out in those woods, but it turns out there's a lot out in those woods, and some of the trails will actually take you to some of these ruins. I know that there's a trail that will take you to the old dam. There's an old dam and an old mill, and kind of the mill wall is out there, and you can walk around on the wall. You can look at it and see it up close and touch this history. Now, the reason there's so many crumbling chimneys and foundations and things out in those woods, it's because before it was a park with hiking trails, it was a community of farmlands, right? It was its own community into itself. There was a farm, or there were farms, there was a school, there were churches, and homesteads and mills. This was used as basically a community of farmers in the early 1900s, and then later was sold to the state and turned into hiking trails. And so I think even if you've lived in Raleigh your whole life like me, if you weren't born before that happened,
wouldn't know that,
you wouldn't
right?
Know. You just think it's
right.
Hiking trails, and you find out there's so much history. And one thing I want to mention is if you're out there and you ever notice there will be flowers blooming, just like bulb flowers, just kind of blooming randomly, usually yellow ones. That is a marker of where there used to be a home because people had those in their gardens.
Oh, that's amazing.
So if you see those just out there in the woods, that's probably what you're seeing.
Kind of makes you think someday what people will think of Dick's Park, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of buildings out there. Some will stay, some will go. But there will always be history there that people will, eventually learn about. That's just fascinating. Well, we will be back after the break with more from Heather Leah about multiple historic sites along the Eno River. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with Heather Leah about hidden historical treasures that could be seen while hiking in and around the Triangle. So let's talk about the Eno River Trail. Tell me about the Speedway. What can people see there?
Okay, well, there's a lot along the Eno River. The Speedway is out around the Eno River as well, and the Speedway is the Occoneechee Speedway, and a lot of it has been preserved. So there are little ghost footprints of speedways all around the state from back when NASCAR was even more popular and prominent. The Speedway, the Occoneechee Speedway, was, I believe it was the first dirt track and one of the first tracks. And before it was a NASCAR track, it was actually a horse racing track. That belonged, I believe it was to Julian Carr, who Scarborough is named after. So that track has been out there for a long, long time, used in many capacities. But today, if you go out there, you can see the grandstands are still there, frozen in time.
Wow.
There are race cars out there rusting away. I mean, you can walk up to a car, look inside it. You can see the roll cages inside of it. The cars are these like old-timey cars rusting, and you can see the steering wheels. You can walk right up to them, and they're just in the middle of the woods. It's like a race car and then woods.
Out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. And then they've got the stone like stadium seating. You can walk up these stone stadium seats.
That's
At
amazing.
the top, there's a big wooden structure. It says like Pepsi on the side. That was probably, I don't know a lot about NASCAR stadiums, but it looks like it might have been where they would have sold maybe concessions.
Sure.
And then there's the place where the person would stand and wave the flag. That stand is still there as well. So there's
literally frozen in time.
It's frozen in time, and it's been preserved. So it's there for people to walk up and look at it. You're welcome to visit it. It's open.
That's really cool. So there's another area around the water pump station. What was it built for, and what is it like today?
So the Eno River, just to clarify, the Eno being a river that has been there for a long time, that was a place that attracted European settlers when they came in and colonists. Now, before that, indigenous tribes lived out there as well. So there's a lot of history around that river because it was a waterway, and that's where people would want to settle and have their homes. So if you go out there and you're hiking on pretty much any of those trails, you'll be able to find things that date back to the 1800s, even possibly the 1700s. There's homesteads still out there. There's mill, there's like an old mill where you can see like the basement of the mill there. There's a graveyard cemetery called the Cablands, which for Halloween, we'll talk about that one because there's a lot of stories associated with that. And then in another part of the park, there's this water pump station. There's a trail that leads right to it, and it has a ton of history. It is quite old, over a century old, and it was one of the original water sources for Durham. So it's a lot of history.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
People used to go swim out there around it back when it was still standing there. But a lot of it is still there. So there's like the big, tall stone walls are like on a cliff overlooking like the river. It's quite a view.
So you can see it, yeah.
And you can go, I'm not saying to climb down in it, but you can see way down into it. You can see down in the bottom where there's like pipes and old rusted things. It's like a huge basement, and the walls go up really high. It's quite beautiful to look at. And it's still kind of a popular swimming spot even today to swim in the river near it. So it's kind of maintained some of that history.
That's amazing. And you mentioned, but as a tease, the Cablands Cemetery, but obviously we need to know a little bit about that. And there's a mill there as well.
Yes. So the Cablins are part of a family that lived there in the 1800s. Kind of like Umstead, it was a community in and of itself. It had a mill, a school, a church, and a lot of those remnants you can sort of find out there in the woods if you know where to look. So there is a mill out there near there. It's hard to find. We had to do a lot of trekking around trying to look for it. We heard lots of creepy noises out there, and the cemetery is a very old cemetery, dates back to the 1800s, just in the middle of the woods. So you'll be walking out there and just stumble into these old graves. Some of them are so old that they've sunken in because the caskets underneath have started to rot away. And there's a lot of stories, of course, that it's drawn over the years of people claiming to. One of the big claims is that you'll hear your name whispered to you in your ear if you're out there walking.
Sounds a little Blair Witch Project.
It is, and I will tell you, we went out there again as a Halloween story one year, and we used something to listen for voices.
To capture that.
Right, and I will tell you, we had it on. There was static, like normal, it just makes static. And then all of a sudden, we heard a woman's voice come over and say, "Hello?" And it made my hair stand on end.
Did you record that?
We did.
Oh, wow.
It was eerie. It was eerie.
And you could hear it on the recording?
You could hear it, yes. I mean, she comes over and goes, "Hello?"
Oh,
and like she's asking who we are. And then later,
chills.
It was eerie. And then later, same thing. We heard just a piercing scream through the woods. It was eerie being out there. So
can you read the grave sites? I mean, can you read the stones?
Some of them, and some you can't. Some of them are broken. I would say, depending on what listeners think, maybe we go to a podcast in the cemetery at night and talk about what we experience out there.
Maybe we do. Maybe we're going to do that, Heather, for Halloween. So where can people see your stories?
So if you want to see more of this type of content, Hidden History, just go to WRAL.com and search Hidden History.
Thank you, Heather, for your expertise and always your fascinating stories. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.
Leave a comment and share this video with your friends. With daily uploads, there will always be a conversation.